Hello. I wonder if I'm going to have any friends left in a few weeks' time. I'm going to tell you about my friend Delia, because we've had a little bit of a disagreement. I suppose it will survive this. And also my friend Victoria, although that's not so much a disagreement maybe as a reminder. Now, Delia sent me a letter in response to the video I made entitled Why the George Floyd Riots, sorry about that, the camera was in the wrong place. Why the George Floyd riots remind me of Ozymandias. First of all, I have to tell you something about my background with Delia. We were both students together and we were both university lecturers, more or less together. And we both suffered from the sexism that was rampant in the British university system of the time, which was just an old boy network and excluded a lot of people, a lot of women, actually women more than people of ethnic minorities, I think. We both had careers which were more or less crippled by this system, and for that reason we were both feminists, which is, just going off at a tangent for a little bit, is why I think Sargon is very unfair when he talks about feminists as a sort of blanket thing, when he's not really talking about real feminism. He's talking about the sort of Marxism and intersectionality that has overtaken it or taken its name. Right, well, Delia thought of putting a comment under my George Floyd video when she decided that it had to be more nuanced than that, and she sent me an email instead, quite a long email. And interestingly enough, at the same time, I got a message from Victoria, who was asking for my help in protecting a statue in a city where she lives. Now, to go on to Victoria's message first, apparently the statue is of a man who, a 19th century philanthropist who people now call a racist. And she was saying she was starting a petition because he's not a racist. And my answer to her was that although I'm going to support her cause, just answering the accusation of racism is, in my opinion, the wrong way to go about it, because you're just playing the game of people who are trying to destroy our history. The man wasn't a racist. You can't find a 19th century person who has written anything of any length where you can't find something that has been said that is disparaging of different races, religions, colours or genders, because that's the way people in the 19th century spoke. And you shouldn't play their game. You know, it just puts you on the wrong foot. They shout racist and you go, not a racist, as if that was even an issue. There's a chap called Oliver Tambo. He was one of the founders of the African National Congress, lived in Haringey for a while he was in exile. So Haringey have put up a statue in his memory. It's, by the way, surrounded by security cameras. Why? Because there are many Africans who don't like Oliver Tambo. Tambo himself, while his cause had the noble ambition of ending apartheid, he himself is implicated in murders and atrocities, not only in South Africa, but when the ANC was in exile and he presided over massacres within his own ranks in order to enforce what he saw as discipline there, and also rampant sexual abuse. So are we going to do away with the newly installed Tambo statue just because he didn't flinch from exercising his authority with deadly force and thought that the sexual abuse of women in the ANC was no big deal. Well, frankly, I would have had second thoughts about putting the statue up in the first place, knowing all that. But it's there now, and that's the end of it. As for statues of British explorers, legislators, and movers and shakers from, well, various centuries, that's just part of our history. I think it's nothing to do with their attitudes. They're there. I think Oliver Cromwell was an absolute stinker. But I wouldn't have his statue removed for that reason. He's part of our history. I don't care what his opinions were. It's just a bloody statue now. Now, back to my friend Delia and this part of her letter, which reads, I feel strongly opposed to your phrase, those idiots kneeling to black people and apologising. Why call these people idiots? Why not believe that there are white people who truly feel ashamed of past, if not present, unjust treatment of blacks, slavery, denial of basic human rights, lynchings, exclusion, discrimination, and other atrocious behaviours? Calling them idiots sounds to me like dismissing responsibility. Some, albeit not enough Americans, take for the deeds. Sorry, I was reading that wrong. Take for the deeds, attitudes, legislation, and exploitation of their forefathers. Why insult people who feel committed to express compassion for others? Well, you see, this is my point. They're not feeling compassion. They're just jerking off on their own self-importance. All right. I did write back to Delia, and well, I'll share with you more or less, not word for word, more or less what I wrote. Firstly, what's the point of apologising for what your ancestors did? It doesn't get you anywhere. But even worse, it most likely wasn't even their ancestors. I would be willing to lay money that all of the white people begging forgiveness in this disgraceful little clip here.
You get the victory. Father, we ask for forgiveness from our black brothers and sisters for years and years of racism, of systematic racism.
And this.
Double one. Go ahead, man.
I'd be willing to bet that they came from stock that arrived in the 19th century from Italy, Ireland, Germany, places like that, and had nothing whatsoever to do with slavery. Even they arrived after slavery, never mind before, when most of them were in the north. So what these people were doing was they were bundling together all white people, irrespective of their histories, into one racial group and blaming them. Is that not the very definition of racism? And secondly, how do you know the black people to whom they were apologising were not themselves descendants of slave owners? Right? First of all, let's just look. Black people owned slaves. Here is an article about a chap called Sherrod Bryant. Black slave owner, an untold part of history, it says here. Okay. Like many wealthy landowners of the pre-Civil War South, Sherrod Bryant owned slaves. They probably worked much of Bryant's 700 acres in Middle Tennessee, an area larger than that of Andrew Jackson's Hermitage plantation. The slaves under Bryant helped raise hogs for their owner, who had a large family and was always looking to buy more property. Unlike many slave owners, however, Sherrod Bryant was black. Now, he wasn't on his own there. It's now acknowledged that many black people owned slaves. And right here at the bottom, one of the descendants of Sherrod Bryant, by the way, he's a retired Air Force. Hang on. a retired Air Force veteran. This is what he says. That was just a fact. If you had a lot of property and you were a big farmer, plus you had to feed your family, you had slaves, because where would you find help? That's what Carl Bryant said, a descendant of this black slave owner. He said it just had to be like that because that's the way things were. Why is that excusable for Sherrod Bryant when it's not excusable for the white people? Well, the fact is it wasn't excusable. That's slavery is not excusable. But somehow we turn off our critical facilities when one of the black slave owners happens to be himself black. And they talk about him as a pioneer. Many pioneers that came have died and have been forgotten, Carl Bryant said. I don't want him to be forgotten. Well, why should this slave owner not be forgotten and others be forgotten? What's the difference? You're still a slave owner. It's nothing to do with owning slaves at this point, is it? It's to do with a hatred for one race, in this case the whites, against another race, in this case the blacks. Now, what about the black people? Well, as I said, they were black slave owners. But we've also got to remember that the black people who were brought to America as slaves were bought by white people from black Africans. Are we about to see delegations of Nigerians coming over to kiss the feet of American blacks? I don't think so. And then where does it end? Okay, in 12th century Yorkshire, the entire Jewish population of York, men, women and little babies, were herded into Clifford's Tower, which was part of the original York Castle, and they were all burnt to death. Are we going to get lines of Yorkshiremen queuing up to kiss the feet of the Jews in Leeds? I don't think that either. And especially, I doubt that some of the Yorkshiremen who happen to be of Pakistani heritage, they're not likely to be kissing the feet of Jews for the responsibility of something that happened to other Yorkshire people 800 years ago. Well, but that's different, I hear some of you say. No, it isn't. Those Pakistani communities that are in Yorkshire now are no more responsible for the sins of 800-year-old Yorkshire people as these white people are responsible for the sins of 300-year-old white people in America. But by their actions, those idiots in America are singling out groups with single characteristics, which is, as I say, the very definition of racism. They are encouraging the balkanization of America. And we all know where balkanization ends up, don't we? Why don't you treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of promotional merchandising? The Grannyopteryx t-shirt or the Granbo mug, which comes in 2 flavours, with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. And whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, check you're still subscribed, and share, share, share.